Hey, it's Charlie from Charlie Reads and Reviews, and I'm here to finally finish up my wrap up for the month of August. So, I had a great reading month. I thought I was going to really push and make it to 16, but no matter, I sorted very well. I read 14 books in the month of August, all of them authored by women. That was the theme for the month. In terms of my possibility pile, I actually didn't do the numbers, but I think I did fairly well, finishing some books that I've been wanting to read for a long time. So that was really great. I did a midweek, not midweek, mid-month review of the first 8 books that I read, and I will link to that video above and below. But I'm going to quickly just go through the 8 books, and I'll put the other way. I'll put an image over here with the book and its rating, just for ease of reference. All right, so first up was Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Then In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. Those both were audiobooks. Then I finished What Storm, What Thunder by Mariam J.A. Chauncey. And that was also an audiobook. And then my first physical book was You Made a Fool Out of Death with Your Beauty by Akwenkwe Emezi. And then my next one was 491 Days by the late Winnie Madikizela Mandela. And then the only ebook that I read at all this month was Elsewhere Home by Leila Abulela, a collection of stories. I think that was also the only collections of stories that I read. The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin was my first fantasy for the month, and then followed up with The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty or Shannon Chakraborty. So that was a really great first half of the month, and it continued to be really fantastic, with the next book that I finished being I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is an audiobook that I found rather randomly on Script. Okay, but before we get to that, I just realized I'm a little bit thirsty, but let's see. So I'm not drinking wine today because it's a little bit warm. We're getting into spring almost. Technically, spring starts on the 21st of September, but we always go spring day in South Africa is on the 1st. And so, the weather's been playing around well this weekend, but I know, as you can see, I've still got like long sleeves on. It's not exactly full on spring weather just yet. So I am drinking makgeolli, which is the peach flavor made by icing. I don't know. So makgeolli is like rice wine from Korea. I never actually really drank this when I lived in Korea. I lived in Korea for about 3 years, between 2009 and 2012. And I really preferred like mekju, which is beer, and soju, which is also a kind of liqueur or liquor, clear liquor made from rice as well, I believe, but just obviously made very different. This, as you can see, oh, I didn't shake it. So sorry. I should have shook it before I open it. But you'll see it's not very clear. It's very milky, but it's actually really delicious, and it's like bubbly. If it's got an effervescence to it. It's like drinking some kind of soda, peach flavored soda. So I never really drank makgeolli, and I just assumed it wasn't nice. I don't know. I think I had one experience with it that I didn't enjoy, and so I just never ever partook in it. And one of my favorite restaurants here in South Africa, in Johannesburg, it's called Banchan in Parkmore. If you are in South Africa, do go check it out. And they have makgeolli there, and my good friend Sonia was like, let's try out makgeolli. She also lived in South Korea. That's when we met, even though she's also South African. And I was sold on this, especially when we tried the peach flavor. So they have these in cans. I'm sure I could get them cheaper at a Korean grocery store, but I tend to remember to purchase it when I'm at the Korean store. Anyway, so that's what I'm drinking today. So Jeanette McCurdy, let's get back to I'm Glad My Mom Died. I didn't know who Jeanette McCurdy was. I looked at the pictures that it was like going all over in particular Bookstagram. I didn't really see it anywhere on book. I thought like one place on BookTube, potentially a second one in a wrap up now, but it wasn't like all over, at least the booktube that I follow. Whereas on my Bookstagram, it was everywhere. This memoir that apparently is the best memoir ever. And I was like, do I want to check it out? Because I've read a lot of memoirs this year. And in fact, this month, I think I read four memoirs. Four memoirs in the month of August. So I was like, okay, I'm a bite. I'm going to check this one out. So it was available on Audible, and I had started reading The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty, but I decided I want to leave that for September. And so I thought, let me check it out. It is a really good book. So Janet McCurdy is a former child actress who is now, I think, a podcaster, a writer, and a bunch of other things. I did not know who she was until people started mentioning iCarly, and I was like, oh, her face now made sense, but I didn't know what the character's name was. It was definitely a show that was, I was too old for when it came out. I recall watching it through either my younger siblings or my niece and nephew. So I have seen it, but it's not something that I fully understood or really got engaged with. I did learn a lot about it, not a lot, but some aspects about it through this memoir. So in this memoir, we're basically following the life of, relatively short life of Jeanette McCurdy. And I say short for now. I wish her a long life. But by the time she's written this memoir, I don't know if she's even in her 30s yet. So in this memoir in particular, she's reflecting on her really tumultuous and at sometimes quite abusive relationship with her mother, as well as other kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? We see in the background, in the periphery, other familial relationships, but the predominant one is the one that she has with her mother. We also see the negative aspects that appear in the Hollywood scene and the ways in which children aren't safe. And so I know a lot of people, when they've talked about this book, one of the things they've been saying is like, we should stop having child actors. I don't think that's the solution. I really think that there is a role and a space and a place for children to be actors. I do believe that there are children who believe that they want to be actors. I think that adults ruin things for children. And so the question becomes, what are we going to be doing to hold Hollywood accountable and the government accountable to ensure that the parents of these children never abuse them? A, I mean, we see what happened to Britney Spears and her family. B, how do we put pressure onto Hollywood to ensure that the child actors are not abused? Because what I saw through this book was that there was a lot of covering up, a lot of protection that was happening from Hollywood. And so the question the issue isn't that we shouldn't have any child actors. The issue is that as adults, we are failing children. So that's what I got from this book. I really enjoyed it, felt it was well written, and it was well narrated. It was narrated by Jeanette. She is a former actress, so it made a lot of sense. And I gave it 4 stars. Right, then the next book was a physical book, and it was the only book that I read that was a woman in translation. I was hoping to read one more, but I don't know why I didn't pick it up. Anyway, so it was The Dinner Guest by Gabriela Ibarra. I enjoyed it. I'm coming to this new way of having really slightly indented tabs, which I really think looks gorgeous on books and feels nice, and it doesn't feel overwhelming. So that's my new thing. I'm going to go and retab every single book of mine. But yeah, so the Dinner Guest by Gabriela Ibarra. Gabriela Ibarra is a descendant of a political family in Spain, and in particular, a family that is a nationalist family based in the Basque country in Spain. And I don't know how much you know about the history of Spain, but I do recall as a kid that there was a lot of like civil war and fighting around the Basque country. I didn't know the details of it, but I do recall seeing stuff about it on the news when I was younger. And so we get to see a little bit of these aspects of it reflected through the story. So it is known as an autofiction. What that means, from when I Googled it, And I'm back. Sorry, my cats, if I don't listen to them, they start and they make a lot of noise. They scratch up things. So it's just easier for me to just listen the first time. Yes, they control me. All right, so um, this is an autofiction, and when I Googled what that means, in essence, it is based on real life events that happened in Gabriella's life and to two family members. But there are some liberties that she has taken to fill in gaps where she doesn't have information. So that's where the fiction comes into it. Honestly, when you read it, it reads like a memoir. I honestly can't tell what could have been real or fictional. But I suppose if you're somebody from Spain who is quite close to the history of the Basque country in particular, you might be able to pick up things that she would have taken some liberties with. So, in essence, we're following two deaths that happen in her life, to family members that have impacted her. The first one being her grandfather. So, her grandfather, trying to see if I can see his name. No, it's not up front. But her grandfather was a very, well, as I said, she comes from a political family and a wealthy family who are nationalists in the Basque country. So he was viewed as a figure which represented what the separatists, the Basque separatists, were fighting against. And so her grandfather is kidnapped one day in May in 1977 in front of all of his children, one of those children being her dad, Gabriella's father, but her father at that stage is an adult. I'm not sure how old Oyagi was, but her grandfather wasn't that old. He's probably like in his late 50s or early 60s. And he gets kidnapped, and they ask for a bunch of things, including ransom money, and they end up killing him. Approximately, I think it was like a month and a half later, or a month and a few days later. And so in the first part of the story, she is reflecting on that. When she was growing up, she would hear snippets here and there, but she wasn't really that focused onto it. Why she started to explore it was when her mother dies. So her mother gets really aggressive cancer, and initially they believe, and the doctors believe, that it's quite curable and they caught it in time, but it turns out that it's a lot more aggressive than they realize, and she doesn't die. Doesn't die. She dies, unfortunately. And when she dies, her father kind of breaks down and starts saying things that he's never said before about the other death that really shook him, which is the death of his father. And so that's what prompts her to go on this journey to learn more about her grandfather. But the way the story is told is we first hear about the grandfather, and then we go through her relationship with her mother. She has a really beautiful relationship with her parents and with her mother in particular. And whilst I felt like it's a well-written book and I really enjoyed it, I think I gave it a rating of 4.75, so I thought it was really well-written. What it did make me become aware of is that this is one perspective of the conflict that occurred in Spain from like the probably even beyond the early 70s up until the late 90s. I would love to read a book. So if anyone knows a book from somebody who's either a Basque separatist, whether they were part of, I've forgotten what that Basque separatist organization was called, whether they're from that organization or just a person who basically grew up in poverty in Spain and felt the desire to be free from Spain. Really enjoyed this. I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's quick. So it was a great read for me. That's Women in Translation. Then the next book that I finished, I forgot. Before I finished that book, I finished this beautiful book, Jade, City by Fonda. As you can see, I was still doing my tabs, a little bit more raised. Not too bad, but starting to figure out how to get them a little bit more in. I think there's just a few that I need to fix, but for the most part, I'm okay with this. So Jade City by Fonda is the first book in the Greenburn saga. Greenburn saga is a story about family. It's a political, a political book where we get to see just what people do when they have power, both in terms of physical power, but also in terms of wealth and influence in the ways in which they manifest themselves, which I have to admit was what really elevated this story for me. So we're following the family, I think they're the Ooh, Charlie Cole, the Cole family. So, green bones. So, on this island called Kikon, you get two indigenous peoples there. They're Kikonese and the. Oh man, I really should have done this video just after I finished this because everything is out of my head. But anyway, so you get these two people who have one has the ability to hold and handle jade. This type of jade is only found on this one island, Kikon. And so the one indigenous group can handle this jade without anything happening. It's just like holding a piece of rock to them. The other ethnic group, the Kikonese, they can hold the jade, but it does have an impact on them in terms of it enhances their human capabilities, so they get superhuman capabilities, but they're raised in a way and trained in a way to be able to handle holding jade and utilizing its power in a way that enhances their life force and doesn't take away from it. Unfortunately, a lot of other outside parties have become very interested in jade, and so they've figured out how to create a drug that you can take to kind of take the edge off of what jade does to you, because the worst that jade can do is cause the itch, which basically causes you to like attack yourself and eventually kill yourself. It sounds like a really addictive drug in some shape and form. So there's this other drug called Shine or SN1 that can help you take the edge off. And so what this has done has created this imbalance. On top of that, the Green Bones, in terms of a clan, have been split up for a good couple of years now into two clans now. Well, more than two, but there's two main ones. And that's the Mountain Clan and the Nopi Clan. The Cole family are the head of the Nopi Clan. Their patriarch has just retired and handed it over to his grandson, who is a very well-balanced leader or head of the clan, but potentially might be naive to some of the underhanded ways that politics can manifest itself. And on the other hand, of the Mountain Clan, the patriarch dies quite early, very unexpectedly, and there's a lot of bloody mess that happens in terms of who ends up taking over the clan, and this kind of causes some conflict to arise between these two clans. And so in essence, that's what breaks up the political intrigue. It's a lot of things that are covered in here. I think there's just a lot of really great writing, but more than anything, I was so fascinated to understand the ways in which people do things for power. Yeah, the way people do things for power. Absolutely loved it, gave it 5 stars. Right. Then the next book that I finished, also a physical book, and that was Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong, A Reckoning on Race and the Asian Condition. Again, loving this. So in this memoir, it's a collection of essays where Kathy Park Hong is actually looking at what it means to be Asian American in a country that rewards Asian Americans as being the ideal form of minority Americans, but also does not see Asians as American. There was a lot of really interesting facts that I learned here. Like, for example, there are Chinese Americans who have literally been in America since, I think it was at the 1600s, very early on, very, very early on in America's history. And so it begs the question as to why, when Americans become very racist in in trying to tell East Asians in particular to go back to China or go back to where they came from, that it doesn't really make sense, because there's proof and evidence of Chinese lineage being part of the original peoples who set up America, and so that includes people who at that stage identified as German, as British, as Irish, as Italian, as Scandinavian, wherever they're Russian, whatever they identified as when they came originally. I don't know the years, so I don't want to throw out years because I might be using the wrong one and I can't find the page where they talk about what year it was when they were building the railways and the railroad network system in America. But that's how far back it was. So the Wild Wild West. And there's a lot of things that she also explores around the reasons why Asians, and when she says Asians, we're now not talking about the way Americans see Asians as only being East and Southeast Asian, East Asians are like Southeast and Far East Asians, but the broader spectrum, including Desi, so South Asians as well. That there was a huge ban that in 1965, I don't actually know when the ban actually happened, but in 1965, the US lifted up this immigration ban. Before, they had basically banned people from brown and black countries from entering the US. And so there was a big movement of obviously Europeans predominantly coming into the US, and or light-skinned people, not light-skinned, but people with lower melanation coming into America. And in 1965, the US removed that ban, but they had a caveat. You had to be someone who was coming into America with certain skills, like you could be a mechanic, an engineer, a doctor, a scientist, etc. And so that's why a lot of Asians who migrated from 1965 onwards tended to be professionals. I can say the same about even Africa, because it actually was all brown and black. You had to have some kind of graduate degree to enter. And so that already kind of sets you up to be, several steps ahead of other minorities in America if you're already coming with an education that enables you to get a job. And most of the times they were skills that they had that were very scarce or very much in high demand. So lots of really interesting thoughts. It's not a really long book. It was 203 pages, so it was actually quite short, but it did take me a while to read. I think I read it over 4 or 5 days. I was reading a couple of other books at the same time, but also it's a lot of heavy things that you have to sit and think about and reflect on. But I made lots of notes, and I really, really enjoyed this. I think it's an important book to read. I read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson in July, and I think that this is a great companion piece, especially if you are American, to read alongside that. And I gave it 4.5 stars. All right, and then the second last book that I finished was a YA sci-fi book, Legend by Marie Lu. I follow Marie Lu on Bookstagram, and she had made an announcement, or she'd shown some pictures of some original concept art for the Legend TV adaptation. I didn't know there was a TV adaptation, and I was like, oh, I'm excited. And then I found out it was a dystopian. I'm trying to read a lot more dystopians. There's a project I want to do, like a video series I want to do later this year with a really good friend of mine around dystopians. So I'm trying to read as many dystopians as possible. And so when I heard that this was a dystopian, I was like, I'm in. So I will say this book started off really well, and it had me by chokehold, and I couldn't put it down. I was reading another book at the same time that was quite heavy, and any chance I got to read this, I was excited. So I read this, I think, in 2 days, really, really enjoyed it. But there was a time when it started to get very YA for me. And I know people get irritated when you say these things. You're like, if you don't like YA, why do you read it? It was really well written, I will say. I really enjoyed it. I gave it over 4 stars. But there were things that just really bugged me. And I know they shouldn't, but it just really frustrated me that there are 2 protagonists here who meet, who should hate each other at some point, like really hate each other, but they can't because they're so in love with each other, because they spent a literal 2 to 3 days with each other. Yes, I get we live in this dystopian world, this post-apocalyptic world, but it still doesn't make sense to me. The level of, attraction is one thing, but just the level of loyalty that they show towards each other out of nowhere. Now, I understand in order to build that out, they could, she'd have to have written a much longer book. This one was 305 pages. to get that, to build out to that effect. But it is one of the things that is a challenge for me sometimes when it comes to YA, that it just sometimes does not feel very believable to me when two main characters hate each other so much, and then a small little thing happens and they suddenly become so in love. But I do want to read the remainder of the series. I overall enjoyed it. And what is it about? It follows two points of view. One is from June, who is a young, privileged woman living in post-apocalyptic Los Angeles. She has a big desire to become one of the best soldiers that the Republic has. I don't know how many years away. Maybe it was 300 years ago. 300 years in the future. Let me see if they put in. But yeah, 300 years in the future. I'm just saying 300. It doesn't say that here. 300 years in the future, America had some post-apocalyptic event happen, and it destroyed infrastructure. It caused a scarcity of land, which resulted in different people fighting. And so we have this one part of America that I assume used to be the original part of America that calls themselves the Republic. And then the rest of America that is kind of free from the Republic are known as the colonies. And the colonies, in essence, are fighting or finding ways to basically break down the Republic from within. And June is basically on the Republic side. She is raised privileged. She is an orphan, but has an older brother who is a soldier who is murdered. And her whole world kind of erupts. On the other hand, we have Day. Day is also a young boy. So they're both 15 years old, but he's on the other side of the tracks. He's been raised on the wrong side of the tracks. He is extremely intelligent, but he has failed his trials. Trials are these special exams that you must pass to determine your level and your value to society in the Republic. And he fails it and manages to escape the system, and then starts fighting the system, trying to save one human being at a time. Not in a way that is necessarily violent, but in a way that irritates the Republic. And one day, June and Day are completely pitted against each other. And yeah, I really did enjoy it, and I definitely want to check out the rest of it. Despite some of the things that bugged me, they weren't bad enough for me to DNF this, and I definitely want to complete the series. And I can imagine that this would translate really beautifully onto screen. So I'm excited for the TV adaptation. And so that's 4 stars. And then my final book was an audiobook, and this was The Inheritance of Orquidia, Divina. This was by Zoraida Cordova. So Zoraida Cordova is actually American of Ecuadorian descent, but I have captured her as being from Ecuador. The book, some part of the book is set in Ecuador in South America. She is of Ecuadorian descent. But the reason I even picked up this book is one of my Storygraph challenges is that I am meant to read a fantasy from South America. Now, all the other fantasies that I was aware of was like magical realism, and I just didn't want to read magical realism. I understand the magical realism is a form of it's a subgenre within fantasy, but it's not my favorite subgenre in fantasy. Typically because it's just, I think the things I really enjoy about fantasy is just the absurdity sometimes that some of the fantastical elements can go to that magical realism doesn't necessarily indulge in. Anyway, so when I was like really struggling, but I was about to just bite the bullet and read 100 Days of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia. But, well, I couldn't read it in August. I was going to read it this month. And I found this book. So in the story, we are following lots of different people who are, I think it's 4 grandchildren, 3 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild of Orquidia Divina. She is a matriarch who has sent out messages to her progeny saying, I'm dying, come and get your inheritance. And all of her family comes from all over the world, and some of them have some really pent-up issues and anger with where it concerns Orquidia, others find themselves forgiving her, and some of the things that she just refused to explain, refused to elaborate on. And through this journey, the three grandchildren and the one great grandchild start to reveal and learn more about their grandmother and understand that she is human and she has made some mistakes, but a lot of them she was doing it to put out of a place of love and protection for them. It is a really beautiful book. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to get a physical version of this. I do feel that, especially sometimes when I was listening to this, I'd be so distracted I wasn't paying enough attention to some aspects of it, but I really enjoyed it. Felt that it was the perfect amount of pace. We would have we'd see ourselves going back and forth in time in terms of seeing the now and then seeing Orquidia when she was younger, and building up for us until the two stories kind of connected, and now we understood who Orquidia was, why she made the decision she made, why she wasn't answering some of these questions, and exactly where did all this magic come from that she seemed to just naturally hold and had somehow managed to gift to her progeny. Absolutely loved this, really do recommend this, and I want to read more of Zoraida's works. I know that the one that I wanted to check out, I think it was the Brooklyn Brujas, but that's based in New York. But I definitely want to check it out because I've hit that prompt now. I really like her writing style, and I think it'll be cool for me to read more of it. So I gave her 4.75 stars. And there you have it. Those are the 14 books that I read in August. I had a fantastic reading month. I think I averaged 4.5 stars, something along those lines, for the month of August. That's how great. The lowest rating I gave a book was 4, and the highest was a 5. And it was just a really great reading month. So if you come this far into this video, maybe put a death emoji in there. And the reason for that is, out of all the books that I read this month, my favorite read, I think I'm going to give that to You Made a Fool Out of Death with Your Beauty by Kwekwe Emezi. And the reason for this, as much as I really loved everything else that I read, the reason why I've chosen this book in particular is because it's the book that really got me thinking quite thoroughly about the ways in which I one day would like to have a life partnership with someone someday. And I think that's pretty cool. Cheers.